50 years after the civil rights movement in the United States, research shows that the people who've benefited significantly from the struggle is the Caucasian woman. From my perspective, that's a good thing. At least someone has benefited, although for the most part, it hasn't been people of color. Oftentimes, I find myself asking, why have we made such little progress over the years? Why is it so hard getting the majority group on the same journey to inclusion? And I always come away with the same conclusions. First, we're using ineffective language in our conversations. We're talking about diversity instead of inclusion or inclusive diversity, which is comprehensive of all demographic groups. Ask yourself, do you like being left out of initiatives, programs, processes? Then why would anyone else? In 2007, history was made. I became the first Black elected official for the village of Hanover Park, Illinois. It's a city 1 hour north of Chicago with 40,000 residents. And I was excited when the people chose me to represent them on their most important issues. My team ran on a platform of more transparency in government, lower taxes, of course, and increased diversification of our workers at Village Hall. So I was excited to get to work. The first thing I decided I needed to do was create a village-wide inclusion and diversity committee. Amazingly, my colleagues fought tooth and nail because they didn't want this simple volunteer committee created. I was stunned. I was shocked. In my mind, I was saying, how dare they? Month after month after month after month, we had conversation after conversation after conversation, and they all ended the same way, in hostility. Even when I brought the donuts. Interestingly enough, in December of 2007, the Daily Herald, one of the largest papers in the Chicagoland area, wrote a story about its movers and shakers that year. Of course, I made the list, but for all the wrong reasons. As you notice, they pointed out, Toni always clashes with her colleagues. Toni is always the lone dissenting vote on every issue. But from my perspective, I was A-okay with that. The people elected me to do a job, and I was determined to do that job despite how my colleagues may have felt. Interestingly enough, 1 month later, I was promoted at my day job, the one that pays the bills. I was selected to join the diversity team, and I was so excited. Now I was about to have the opportunity to do the same work at my place of employment that I was doing in the community. So immediately, I started hosting meetings with my key stakeholders. We started this conversation about diversity, and I noticed people were sighing under their breath, and they were making comments about this quota-driven human resource initiative that was designed, at least in their mind, to take away jobs from qualified people to give to underqualified women and people of color. Interestingly enough, I simply wanted to talk to them about creating high-performance teams, thereby enhancing business results. Amazing. We were on two ends of the spectrum. But because I wanted to be successful at work, I couldn't take the same approach that I was taking at the village. I had to find a solution to get people to listen to me. So I had an epiphany after the 4th or 5th meeting. I said, people are feeling uncomfortable with my diversity conversation. And I came to the conclusion that they were feeling uncomfortable because they didn't see themselves as a part of that discussion. So I said, what you gonna do about that? So all of a sudden, I decided inclusion is the way. And I started to have conversations about inclusions and the benefits of it to organizations. Guess what? People started listening to me. And to my eternal relief, I could actually spend 40 minutes talking about the benefits of inclusion instead of the previous 20 minutes I had been spending explaining that I wasn't asking them to give jobs to underqualified women and people of color. Now, what's so interesting about this entire conversation is for the last 35 years, listen to me, 35 years, women have earned more college degrees than men in the U.S. But when you look at these corporations, what do you see at the top? So we have to ask ourselves, what biases are preventing women from having access to opportunities? We have to ask ourselves, what biases are keeping people of color out of the C-suites? Once we start being real with ourselves and answering these questions, I think we'll see more people have access to opportunities. One of the largest organizations for women, here's what they had to say about us. They said because America is a superpower and built on a military basis, that women, we don't fit the stereotype. Men come into the game with people assuming that they are skilled and qualified for leadership positions. Women are consistently overcoming. Until men prove themselves as weak, they have the benefit of the doubt. Women have to prove themselves as worthy in order to get one opportunity. The other thing that consistently comes up in diversity conversations is about Blacks and Latinos stealing jobs away from qualified people, as if we aren't educated, as if we haven't been to the same schools and universities. I want to challenge us to change our language and start talking about inclusive diversity. I am 100% convinced that that is the game changer. For the last decade, as I've been doing this work, as you can see, I've been on an evolution from diversity to inclusion to inclusive diversity, because everyone can see themselves as a part of that solution instead of a part of the problem. No one wants to be seen that way. When you look at this picture, can you tell me who's the CEO? The answer is all of them. But if you Google CEOs of corporations, this is the photo you get back. Propaganda is just out of control. And we have to spend a little time educating people on the position of women, on the position of people of color, and people in communities that are unserved. Until we can have these conversations, no matter how difficult they may be, change will not come. From my perspective, we have a couple of potential solutions I want you to consider. First and foremost, host these courageous conversations. Talk about the things that are really bothering people. In 2009, I was invited to participate in a panel discussion for the largest multinational in America. This was a women's group, and they wanted to talk to subject matter experts about how to advance their women's initiative. The conversation was going great. Everyone was having an awesome time. A lady raises her hand. She has a pressing question. And the question for the panelists is, should we allow men into our groups? Don't we want these groups to be safe places just for us? And as you can imagine, there are 3 people who speak before me. And of course, they could get on board with what this young lady was saying. They really thought that these groups should be kept for the people in them, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's LGBTA, whether it's people with disabilities. They really believe that these groups should be close-knit to these circles. So of course, if you know me, you know I'm going to have to start a fire, right? So I said, let me ask you a question. You have an initiative. You want it sponsored. You come to me because you know I'm a proponent. I'm a sponsor of women's initiatives. You ask me to support you, and I go, yes, I will. I'm going to write you a check for all of $500. because that's all I have in my budget. But think about it. Look at your organization. Who's sitting in the top seats? Men. I bet you, if you formed a relationship with them and asked them to support your initiative, invited them into the conversation, you might get $5,000. Do you want $500 or do you want $5,000? That's the real question you need to ask yourself. I'm convinced that when we start having these conversations where people can talk about the things that are important to them, we will get to the solutions that will help create next generation solutions for our young people. Think about inviting the majority group into your conversations. Remember the movie Hidden Figures that came out last year? There's a particular scene that strikes me as interesting. Remember the little black analyst who was so good at what she did, and every day at a certain time, she had to run from one building to the next building to use the washroom. At some point, the manager noticed that she was gone for a very long time every day. And so, of course, he comes back. He has this big discussion with her about where she goes every day and what she's doing. So, of course, as embarrassed as she was, and we've all been there, she said, "To be, there's nowhere for me to use the washroom in here. There is no colored washroom only here." What did he do? He got his axe. He marched over to the other building with probably 12 or 15 people behind him, and he tore that sign down. That's what happens when you invite the majority group in. Stop disconnecting them from the conversation. Without men involved in this work, we're not going to accomplish anything. Unless we invite men to help us accelerate this agenda, to invite them into the inclusion discussion, things won't change. Furthermore, they won't be sustainable. Interestingly enough, after I came to the conclusion that inclusion was the way, that inclusive diversity was really a game changer, I went back to the village and I started to have different conversations with my colleagues about this inclusion committee. Every session, when I would conclude my comments in the session, I would celebrate whatever historical month it was, and at the end of it, I would say, and inclusion includes you, and you, and you, and you too. And guess what? My Inclusion and Diversity Committee was finally approved after two long years of difficult discussions. I submit to you, that was powerful language changes. A simple change in wording invited them into that committee. They stopped resisting it because they could see themselves as a part of the solution. Inclusive diversity is a game changer. And I want to encourage all of us to think about how we can be more inclusive and diverse. I'm convinced that if all of us get on this same journey to inclusive diversity, we can create the solutions that our young people need for the next generation. Thank you for your time.